Hi everyone, today is our fourth lesson and we are going to talk about animal ethics and critical animal studies. As you've seen, for today I gave you to read one super short article of the author Eileen Christ, the same Eileen Christ that we have encountered while talking about anthropocentrism. So you should be used to her style. She's a super skilled and professional academic, but she's also extremely good in producing more pop and more accessible content. And for example, the article is a very nice, simple way to start to think about animal suffering and the way in which we oppress non-human animals in a human-dominated planet. It's a class about environment and society and environmental ethics. As we have seen, ethics is about behavior, the way in which we behave or we should behave. And undoubtedly, when it comes to behavior toward non-human entities, non-human animals are on the radar, almost because they are present everywhere in our world. They are the wildlife that we exploit. They are the animals that we use as pets. They are the animals that we use as food, as testers for our experiments, especially when it comes to medicine, but also to cosmetics and so on. We use them for entertainment. We use them for their skin, their fur. We use them even when we do ecotourism. Our life is deeply entangled with the one of other animals. And that's why it's really important to think about our relation with them. First of all, when you use the term animals, I prefer to use the term non-humans or non-human animals because humans, I know that it's banal and I should not say it in the 2023, but yes, humans are animals, and except if we accept the human exceptionalism theory in its biblical version, we are animals, and we are animals that evolved among other animals. We are a recent species. We exist on this planet for roughly 300,000 years as Homo sapiens. We choose even a strongly arrogant name when we decided how to name our species. We are the Homo sapiens, so we are supposed to know. And what do we know? We know very few about other animals, actually, because we always interpreted them in a way in which we tended to consider them as objects, or we tended to cover them in symbols that most of the time were the reflection of our ideology, of our religious background. For example, Christianity, that influenced deeply Western culture. It's undoubtedly a religion that used animals as metaphors for sins, vices. Think about the wolf, the bad wolf, and think about the cunning fox, and think about all these animals that represent something, but they almost never represent themselves. Because even when we think about them, most of the time we think about them in a very utilitaristic way, in the sense that we think about them as resources, both as material resources, but also as symbolic resources. So, talking about non human animals, it's very complex and easy at the same time. But I decided for this specific class for today to give you Eileen Christ as an introduction. I give you Suffer the Animals. That is a really short article. So you will have an overview, a very brief overview about animal suffering in terms of how we oppress them. Undoubtedly on Canvas this time around, you will find many pages in which I go step by step explaining some of the most important notions that you need to bring home to expand your knowledge and awareness. And I also gave you many opportunity to go deeper and delve deeper into this topic by using other material, extra material, for example, a conference, a TED talk on Carl Safina, a great expert of animal minds, or also another one of Frans de Waal, another important expert of animal behaviors. but I also gave you the opportunity to listen a recent interview of one of the most important philosophers of our time, especially when it comes to animals, that is Peter Singer. And I also gave you a podcast with Martha Nussbaum, and she's also an important figure in the current animal question. And lastly, I put also Tom Regan, the second biggest author when it comes to basically the emergence of the animal question as a proper philosophical question, but also as a political question in the 20th century. And now in the 21st century, we really need to think deeper our relation with non-humans. As I said before, we use them all the time. Just think about what do you eat, except if you are vegan. For the rest, you will find in your food everywhere tons of animal products. And the way in which we produce food is deeply, deeply violent and oppressive toward other animals. Sometimes things are done with good regulamentations. Sometimes things are done extremely in an extremely exploitative and extractive way. And so it's not my intention right now to explore the animal production, animal farming, and how we produce food starting from animals. We will have later on an analysis of veganism, an analysis of the food industry, etc., because I think that what we eat is fundamental to define who we are as people, as society. I'm not here to preaching veganism or vegetarianism. I'm not here to tell you what you should eat. I just want you to be informed, and that's really important. You need to know the number when it comes to how much we consume animals, and you need to know that animals are not objects, and that there are studies, plenty of studies about their cognition, their capacity to think, to feel pain, to have interest, to play, so on and so forth. There is so much about animals, and even the category animals is a bad category. I was mentioning it at the very beginning of this video. It's problematic to even use the category animals, because it seems that from one side there are humans and on the other side there are animals, but animals is a huge kingdom involving and squeezing under the same category literally millions of species, vertebrates, invertebrates, birds, fish, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and there is simply so much, and we tend to squeeze them in the same tiny category by using the name animals. But how can we put together a blue whale, a camel, a chimp, a gorilla with, for example, a slow worm, a bug, an ant, etc.? So how can we put everything together? What do they have in common in the first place? The thing that they have in common, and we are pretty sure about it, at least for the vast majority, the 99.9% of what we call animals, they can, at a certain degree, experience pleasure and pain. That's why animal ethics has become popular, starting mostly from what we have seen in the previous lecture. So utilitarianism, we have seen it. We already mentioned it. Is a kind of ethical theory that is much more keen to accept the consideration of animals as moral, ethical patients. And Jeremy Bentham and then Peter Singer, they tended to include animals when it comes to ethical consideration, by arguing that at the end of the day, it's not the color of our skin, not our gender, not our capacity to do math, not our capacity to write poems, not our capacity to speak, but at the end of the day, what counts when we have to think about morality is our capacity of pursuing happiness, so avoiding pain and pursuing pleasure. It's the hedonistic utilitarianism. And so basically the argument of Peter Singer is pretty straightforward. So what he says is simply something that is difficult to counter, and not many people were able to give good answers to the claim of Peter Singer. That's why Peter Singer is still pretty solid in his positions. The position of Singer is simply this one: there are no good reason to kill an animal, to exploit an animal, to end the life of an animal, to torture an animal for the sake of human pleasure, especially when our pleasures are not essential pleasure. If it's just about taste undoubtedly something good to pursue for the sake of happiness, but our capacity to um, enjoy some food, some flesh, some meat is not enough to justify the end of the life of a sentient being like a cow. This is the argument of Peter Singer. If you want to squeeze it so much that we are removing all his work, but his masterpiece, Animal Liberation of 1975, is really the starting point from not just for a philosophical discussion. The steel is not enough abundant in the departments, but it was the beginning of the animal liberation movement. The idea that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where we are going to arrive, we need to question the way in which we treat animals, because most of the time you will be surprised, or maybe not, I hope not. We treat animals, non-human animals, in a way that is much, way worse than what we commonly think. Animals don't live an happy life till they are killed and culled. No, they live a kind of obscene life most of the time. And there are very few realities in which we farm and exploit animals in a way that is humane. And even when we arrive to use them in a humane way, even under the condition of capitalism, it was the result of many struggles. But now, as you know, there is not just veganism on the rise, there are alternative foods. There is the possibility of cultivating meat, lab meat. There are many possibilities at the horizon. So we must think if it's still legitimate to use arguments such as tradition, taste, or a fake health argument like proteins that are scientifically not grounded, because people can live and enjoy a good life having a vegan diet, for example. We need to think if it's still enough to use our anthropocentric human suprematist position to justify animal suffering. And it's really interesting, and I want you to think about it because it's much more complex than what we commonly think. Because sometimes it's easy, we can say, oh, let's just avoid to have meat as food, for example. We can go vegan, yeah, it's okay. But when it comes, for example, to invasive species, how should we behave? Should we kill some sentient individuals for the sake of a native species? Is being native enough to make your life counting more than the life of a non-native species? So sometimes you will see there are ambiguities, gray areas when it comes to deciding what is the best to do, the best course of action. So you see, ethics is not something with universal formula. It's rare that in ethics we find a complete golden rule that to apply all the time. And most of the time you need to take a decision: should I save the life of a dog or should I save the life of a child? Undoubtedly most of us will save the life of a child, and yet this is not simply a default action, and such as is not a default action the one of deciding to not eat meat. um, Also in more extreme context, especially in poverty, and where, for example, there are not the possibility for having an healthy diet. So society is complex. That's why if there is from one side the animal ethics arguing that animals, non-human animals, as individuals, not as species, but as individuals, they have what we call intrinsic values. So having intrinsic values, it means to be um, moral patience. Why? Because when you have extrinsic values, basically your value depends on someone else, uh, and this someone else are humans. If we value this dog because we like the dog, we like his company, etc. So this dog has a value. But does the dog have a value of himself, by himself? that's the point of animal ethics. Animal ethics, starting from Peter Singer, but then there are other important authors that I mentioned you on Canvas, for example, Tom Regan. Instead of using utilitarianism, he used an expanded version of Kantian ethics, the ontology, to justify the fact that animals are subjects of a life, and so they have interests, and this kind of interests are what make them part of a community that must be respected. As we have seen that Kant thought that every human being deserves to be respected for their capacity of being autonomous, etc. Tom Regan thinks that a huge quantity of non-human animals should deserve the same kind of treatment, not because they need to go to vote, not because they need to have the same equal rights that we have as humans, but because they need to have certain rights, for example, the rights of not being harmed by us. You can go online, you can Google, you can check around, you can decide to read Empty Cages of Tom Regan, or you can decide to go and read Animal Liberation of Peter Singer, or you can investigate the work of Martha Nussbaum or someone like Carol J. Adams. She's an important ecofeminist, and she also wrote about animal ethics, in her case, connecting it to sexism. There is a lot out there. But what I wanted in this class was to add another layer of complexity, not just by talking about ethics, but talking about a discipline that to me is super interesting. The recent one of critical animal studies. That's why I gave you to read the introduction to the book of critical animal studies. So this tiny chapter, The Emergence of Critical Animal Studies, by Anthony Nocella and others, because this is the way to look at the animal question, not just from a strictly ethical perspective, but from a perspective of how society started to recognize animals as something that we should openly talk about. We know that Henry Salt and the Humanitarian League in the 19th century was able to start a movement to try to following also other movements, like for example the suffragettes or the movement for liberation, anti-slavery, social of various issues, or for example also movement related to workers' conditions, strikes, etc. So there was a lot going on in the past, and that is still going on, because there are plenty of problems among humans. And yet when we think that is a new fashion, a new something that we think about just now because these are a problem of rich people in rich countries, and are brand new problems, we are completely wrong, in the sense that the animal liberation movement, it is true that we can connect it to animal liberation of Peter Singer, but a sensibility toward non-human animals is something that humanity had pursued for a much, much longer period of time. So basically what I'm trying to say is that I want you to read this introduction to critical animal studies, because I want you to know that it's more than 1 century that we are discussing as humans, and as Westerner in particular, our relation with other animals. And for example, you will read that Eastern religions like Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism were much more sensible toward the destiny of other animals and how we are supposed to treat them, etc. While Christianity is much more anthropocentric overall, especially for the mandate that you find in the Genesis, when God gave us the dominion over other species. So this part of the dominion, I know that is kind of controversial for some scholars think that it's not accurate, the word dominion, but yet Christianity has been a lot involved in this idea of reinforcing anthropocentrism, in reinforcing the idea that we are godlike and not without have anything in common with non-human animals. But now, after Charles Darwin, after the theory of the evolution, after that we know so much about how we are done, where we come from, and we start to know a lot of more about non-humans, not just animals, but also plants, fungi, etc. thanks to ecology, thanks to animal behavior studies, we know a hell of a lot more, and we need this knowledge, this empirical knowledge, to inform and change our course of action, our political decisions, and our decision as a society, as individuals, as ethical agents, must be informed by what we know in ecology, what we know in ethology, what we know about animals being sentient, being capable of experiencing pleasure, being capable of experiencing pain, being capable of playing, being capable of communicating in a very rich way. Just think about the communication of whales, for example. There is so much about animals, and we need to know more about them. But we need this knowledge not to remain a purely scientific knowledge. That's why we study environmental society, because we need to know how society is engaging with non-human animals, for example, at the level of art, representation, literature. And I think that the field of critical animal studies is one of the most promising, because it's not just about animals in the way of Peter Singer, in the way of Tom Regan, but it's about animals and how we try to liberate them while we liberate us as animals that tend to oppress not just other species but tend to oppress each other. So there is a lot to do, like for black folks, for women, for people non-binary, queer, LGBTQ, for people belonging to minoritized groups. All of these should count also when we criticize environmental issues in a broader sense. For example, not just animals. So anti-capitalism, whatever. There is a lot out there that must be discussed, and critical animal studies is trying to tell us that we need to think about redefining our relationship with the non-human animals while we achieve a much better society, a much more inclusive society. We should fight sexism, we should fight racism, we should fight classism, we should fight extractivism, we should fight injustice, colonialism, environmental racism, we should fight homophobia, we should fight transphobia, we should fight all these things together in what is called intersectionality or intersectionalism of all the different battles. But in these battles, among all these human-centered battles, we need to include a battle for the liberation of the non-human. Then I don't know your political standpoint. It's not my intention to judge your political standpoint, your sensibilities. And I hope that every time I teach, I don't hurt too much your sensibilities, because my goal here is to make you think and to provoke you, but not to go against you as thinking people. So what I want is not to tell you what is correct and what is not correct, but undoubtedly I think that we can all agree that we must rethink the way in which we relate to other animals. How it's not something that I can tell. There is nothing prescriptive. We can try to have an ethical reflection. I think that Peter Singer has still many solid points and many solid arguments. I think that Regan and Nussbaum and Carol J. Adams contributed in a very significant way to this discussion, and I think that so much more is going on, both in philosophy and in other fields of study. Critical animal studies looks like one of the most promising field of investigation, and I think that you will find very, very interesting to read about this new discipline. Maybe one day will be one you will work on, or one you will give an important contribution to. So I'm glad to present you this, because it's not something so common. And this class, not this class, but this seminar about environmental society will not just be about the most obvious topics. I'm not here to teach you climate change, for example. There are classes about philosophy of climate change. You can listen about climate change basically every day if you just look in the right places. I want to go on more controversial issues, because I think that the class of philosophy is one of the few spaces in which we have the freedom to be really critical. and we can all together grow in an healthier way as a better thinking humans by engaging also with issues that are a bit more complex, a bit more gray, a bit more controversial. So I'm glad that you decided to be here in this seminar, and I hope that I'm doing a good service to you by doing the best to create a simple course, but it's a course that brings a lot of different content, a lot of contents that are from one side unusual, from the other side essential to understand our complex time and to navigate our complex time by enriching our capacity of thinking, because thanks to a more accurate capacity of thinking, a broader vision on reality, we can be better humans, and we can be better citizens, and we can simply be overall better people going around in the world and behaving and engaging with the natural world, with society, with non-human animals as well. So thanks a lot. I hope that this Monday you will have a great time engaging with the two articles that I decided to give you to read. And I cannot wait to start to discuss ecocentrism, biocentrism, and other critical and radical, but very interesting and solid ideas inside the framework of environmental ethics. And we will discuss them this Wednesday. So good luck with your readings, and see you on Wednesday.